Hello and welcome to another episode of India and Global Left. If you are new to the show, please smash that subscribe button. Also consider becoming a YouTube member, a Patreon, or donate small amount given in the link in the description box. Let me welcome our guest tonight, Professor Mohammad Marandi. Professor Marandi teaches at the University of Tehran, Iran. Professor Marandi, welcome back to India and Global Left.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
I wanted to start by asking you what is a correct framework to understand the events that have happened in Iran. There is the narrative of peaceful protests. There is the pro-Iranian government narrative of foreign-backed riots. Does any of these binary captures the reality? How do you describe what's going on in Iran?
Well, first and foremost, I think we should always keep in mind that the same people who've been trying to deny that there's a genocide going in Gaza for well over 2 years, they're the ones who are making all these claims that in Iran these are just peaceful protesters and the government is killing peaceful protesters on the streets. And therefore, if anyone really has faith in Western media still after Gaza, then I think they are just irredeemable. We cannot wake them up to reality. Their eyes will remain closed. But the fact is that these are indeed Western-backed terrorists and rioters that have been carrying out slaughter on the streets of different cities and murder and destruction is happening everywhere that they set their foot, or has been, because the riots and the terror has ended. It ended on Friday last week, on the 9th of January. So it was basically Thursday and Friday where there was a lot of looting and slaughter and mass destruction. This really began, though, earlier with a sudden fall in the Iranian currency, which fell like between 30 and 40%. And it turned out that this was a manipulation from abroad. The Americans were using the Emirates, northern Iraq, and apparently even Afghanistan to put pressure on the Iranian currency. After that, we had small protests in Tehran, and these protests passed off peacefully. Maybe 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, I don't know, but small numbers. And there was no police harassment, there were no arrests. The government said the business people, the shop owners have a right to the currency is dangerous for business. The second day, there were still more protests, and there was still a lot of pressure on the currency. That continued for a few days. And then we saw the sudden appearance of rioters, very professional, very well organized, and armed with machetes, with guns, with axes, with everything. And they were very violent, especially on Thursday and Friday. So we saw in Tehran alone tens of fire engines destroyed, very expensive fire engines, which are very difficult to purchase because of the sanctions. Tens of public buses. People were being shot at by these people. Police officers, many were killed, and there's footage of it coming out gradually. The police and the intelligence. So then, after a couple of days of peaceful protests, where there was no arrest, no police harassment, no conflict, we saw the infiltration of very well trained groups of rioters. They were very violent, and the violence peaked on last Thursday and Friday, the 8th and 9th of January. And there was a there's a huge Persian language media apparatus in the West. Billions of dollars are spent on Persian media against Iran, and they were pushing for the riots. They were advocating the riots. They were giving misinformation, and the the rioters became very uh, aggressive. They started burning down banks. They burned down clinics. In one clinic, they burned alive a young woman nurse. She got trapped and she went upstairs to the top floor, but the fire reached her and burned her alive. They burned down many schools and educational centers, 250 of them within 2 days, literally. They burned down many mosques. In one mosque, they trapped two young men inside and kept throwing Molotov cocktails until they burned alive. They cut off people's heads. They mashed people's heads with, crushed them with stones and swords and axes, and it was extraordinary. And the footage is there. And the police are gradually giving out footage so that first they check and they're identifying people and trying to find the killers. Today they've arrested some of these people. Yesterday they've arrested others, and then they give out the footage for people to see. It's really horrific. And one physician who I know, he operated on a number of people. He said a lot of the injuries and a couple of the people who died uh, in his hospital, their injuries were from pistols, and they were shot at from close range and often from behind. And it's clear that these people were hunting down people on the streets and killing people to create chaos. So they were burning banks, even they burned trees, and as I said, tens of it just total chaos. Tens of uh, fire engines were burned just in Tehran. Tens of public buses. So the and then we had, of course, and this is what makes it most fascinating. The Western media is basically saying these were peaceful protesters, but the Israeli regime begs to differ. Pompeo, who was the head of the CIA, he said that Mossad is on the ground with these rioters. Mossad itself gave out a Persian language statement, which I tweeted. I've tweeted all of these, and said that we're on the ground. Channel 14 of the Israeli regime said that a foreign government, guess who it is, sent in all sorts of weapons, which killed hundreds of police officers and officers of the law and volunteers. And therefore, they are admitting it. They are bragging about it. And then you see these Western pundits, they're trying to, they're upset that the Israelis are ruining their fake narrative of peaceful protesters. So the Israeli regime is saying it. American former head of the CIA, an American former head of the CIA is saying it. The footage that's coming out from Iran clearly shows that these people are killing people. I put out footage myself, even though some of the footage I can't because X won't confirm my age. And people are very angry and outraged. And why do we know they're outraged? Because on Sunday, we had mass protests last Sunday, a week ago, across the country against the rioters and in support of the Islamic Republic, the Constitution, and state institutions. 2.3 to 3 million people in Tehran. It took me a couple of hours just to get there and a couple of hours to get back. And when I was coming back after the rally, people were still trying to get there. And imagine a lot of people are like working class. They're struggling to make ends meet. And because of the sanctions and because of the hardship that the West imposes, but they came anyway. They used up half a day of theirs to make a political statement. So you had me, and then it wasn't just Tehran. All the cities across the country had their own independent rallies. No one came to Tehran. They had the same rallies across the country, and everywhere where we had major riots, the rallies were even bigger. It was extraordinary. The numbers, many millions of people in all were on the streets. So, but this is all something that Western media is hiding, and pundits. And I think it's quite clear that the whole um, currency manipulation, which happened when Netanyahu went to Washington, right? He met Trump. Then we had the currency manipulation. Right after that, we had these well organized rioters and terrorists coming up on the streets across the country using the peaceful protests as an opportunity. And then one final point. So we have their admissions and we have footage. We have Trump and Netanyahu meeting. But one thing else. On Thursday night, the, um, the Iranians cut off the. I mean, I don't remember exactly what time the internet was cut off. But when they cut off the internet, we saw a rapid decline in the riots. And on Friday, even though they were very vicious, even more vicious than Thursday night, they were smaller in number. And then on Saturday, the whole thing fell apart. So since last Saturday, which is now about 10 days, there's been quiet. On Saturday, maybe a few gatherings and here and there across the countries in smaller number, but no, there was no major violence or anything. And then from Sunday onwards, total quiet. All the things that people are hearing about from Tehran, people being killed, it's all fake. Iran, the whole country is completely peaceful. So the cutting off of the internet, what does that show? And coinciding with the collapse of these riots, it shows that they were getting their orders from abroad. They were being coordinated from abroad. So these rioters, they're different groups. You have the Mujahideen Khal, terrorist organization, cult in the West. You have Kurdish separatist groups. You have the monarchists. You have the Wahhabi, Salafi, Takfiris in Baluchistan, and you have the remnants of ISIS. All of them were active. And they hate each other, but they were being coordinated from abroad. And then this sudden collapse that took place basically meant that from abroad they couldn't tell them what to do. So what was happening, for example, in let's say in the city of Rasht, there were riots in one area. So the police would go there, and then they would be told, okay, go to this other place. And they would go and attack a market, and they burned down an entire market. But when the communications were cut, they could no longer get the sort of orders that they were getting before. And therefore, they became headless. And, after a few hours, after 12 to 24 hours, the whole thing fell apart.
We have seen this kind of destabilizations efforts from the West elsewhere recently, and there has been a series of countries um, in different forms, but they're related to Western imperialism. Sri Lanka was one case where neoliberal economic policies imposed on them, along with capital flight from private creditors, led to this kind of currency crisis, and that led to protest, and that was used for political motives to move Sri Lanka away from BRICS and China in particular. We have seen similar thing in Bangladesh, and more recently in Venezuela, direct kidnapping of President Nicolas Maduro. In the larger scheme of things, at a time when the US empire, many are arguing that it is in decline, particularly when looked at from the perspective of China, um, how does the US empire look like from the perspective of Iran and what it is doing in the region?
I think it's clear that it is rapidly declining, but as it declines, it's becoming much more vicious. And the pretense of being civilized and being supportive of human rights, all that is gone. And we just saw how Trump himself stated that now that I haven't been given the Nobel Peace Prize, I'll behave differently. It's you know, he's a crude person, but he's reflective of something much bigger, and that is how the West has removed the mask. And in the case of Iran, I think it's quite clear that the objective of this whole thing, the Trump Netanyahu meeting, and then the the manipulation of the Iranian rial, and then the riots, which these rioters were obviously very well trained. Many of them had arms. At least 300 to 400 policemen and volunteers were murdered. Imagine if this had happened in the United States. If you multiply it by four, taking the US population into account, let's say 1,200 to 1,500 uh, police officers murdered in 2 days in the United States. What would be the response? Remember, just recently, ICE uh, troops, one of them shot a woman in the face, and Trump justified it, and so did his supporters by saying she wasn't turning to the right fast enough. Yet in Iran, they murdered uh, 300 to 400 officers of the law, and they murdered many innocent people. They, as I said, they burned a nurse alive. They cut off people's heads. This, I think, was to create chaos in the country to justify war. So Netanyahu and Trump and the neocons and the Zionists, they wanted to create chaos in Iran to destabilize the country, and then that would justify war. Trump could carry out heavy airstrikes, and then uh, it would be in their dreams, uh, an overthrow of the political establishment. But the Iranians, they outsmarted them. One, they cut off the internet, but also they have massive popular support in Iran. The crowds, I mean, anyone can go to Back to Press TV and look at the rolling coverage on last Sunday. And it's just not Press TV, it's Al Alam, but it was also foreign media. RT was there, Arabic, English, CCTV was there, CGTN was there, Al Jazeera English was there, Al Jazeera Arabic was there, Al Mayadin was there, Turkish reporters were there. It's nothing that the West cannot pretend that the state doesn't have popular support. But in any case, I think that this was a conspiracy to attack Iran. But now that it has failed, we have to see what the United States does. I still think that the chances are very high that the United States will carry out an attack on the country. And the Iranians have warned the Americans through different means that this will be all-out war. And President Pezeshkian has said this, and so have others. So if the United States strikes, then I think we should be very quite sure. I think we should expect a global economic collapse because there will no longer be oil and gas coming from the Caucasus or the Persian Gulf or the Red Sea. I think it will be we'll see a major economic depression, worse than 1929. That's how I see it. If there is a war between the United States and Iran.
And do you see what forms of attack can you imagine? Do you see a full-blown bombing along with kidnapping, as we have seen effort in Venezuela, or an assassination campaign that the Israeli U.S. regime has been doing in West Asia? What can be some of the forms of attack, or is it a full-blown military attack? What are your thoughts?
Well, first of all, murdering the leader is not going to change anything because Iran has a constitution, it has strong state structures, and it has popular support. Whether the West wants to acknowledge it or not, they'll soon find out if they carry out an attack. And then Iran has allies across the region. And in Iraq in particular, we saw in the recent elections, Iran's allies won. So Iraq is a place where the Americans are will be very vulnerable. I don't know what will happen. I don't know if there will be an attack. I can't predict the future, obviously. But the threat is there, and Iran is preparing for a full scale war because that's the best way to prevent war. Iran doesn't want war. But remember, this is something that the West has started. The whole problem with Iran has two problems with the West. One is that it is independent. It is one of the few countries in the world, if the only country in the world, that is really fiercely independent. And second, Iran supports the Palestinian people and oppressed peoples across the world in accordance with its constitution and the ideology of the state. That's why Iran supports Venezuela, Cuba, resistance in Southern Africa, and of course Palestine. And that's Iran's real sin. So the threat of war should be taken very seriously. And I also think that it's quite, we it's really interesting that the Western media is creating this fake narrative that Iran is killing peaceful protesters. But in reality, what Western media is doing, like in Gaza, is that they are blaming the victim. Western and Israeli terrorists and funded rioters, professional rioters, trained rioters, slaughtered large numbers of people, including hundreds of police officers and volunteers who were protecting the streets. Hundreds. Footage is coming out. I put out at least, I don't know, 20 or 30 different clips. It's clear what they were like. And we saw popular support on the streets. So this just shows that Western media is a tool of empire and that we should ignore it in our understanding of one another, of countries across the global south, whether it's Venezuela or Palestine or Iran or tomorrow Cuba or Yemen or elsewhere. Western media will do exactly as the oligarchs in the United States and the West want. So Iran is not going to worry too much about what Western media is going to say about the country. They are preparing for war. And they have warned the United States and US allies and those who have cooperated with the United States in this, which apparently is MI6. It was deeply involved. And of course, the Mossad, along with the CIA. There's talk of other agencies, but these three are pretty clear, their involvement. So Iran is warning the West that uh, you start a war, it will be all out war for us. So we are in a very dangerous situation. I cannot predict. Trump has threatened cyber warfare, uh, and but also we see that at times Trump did back down a bit after the massive anti-riot protests and protests in support of the state. We saw Trump admit that the shooting was coming from both sides. I don't know if you recall that. And although Western media won't, again, their narrative, their fake narrative is very solid. They won't admit that. I think though the Financial Times did in an article a couple of days ago, which I retweeted, that part where they admitted that these people that were on the streets, like they were wearing black and they were like commandos, these terrorists. But in any case, right now we're in a situation where really the fate of the lives of everyone on this planet will somehow be affected by the decision made in the White House. And people may ask, well, why would the White House do something like that if it's going to cause such devastation throughout the world and in the United States? It's clear because the decision makers are Israel first. These people don't care about Americans and American people. They don't care about Europeans. They don't care about anyone. They care about the Israeli regime. So everyone can be devastated as long as it serves the interests of the regime. I don't think it will serve the interests of the regime because I think a collapse in the global economy will have implications that will be devastating for it because its backers will be devastated. And the world will blame the United States for the war and for the devastation. Again, the devastation is not going to be Iran bombing a few bases. The devastation will be the end of oil and gas reaching markets across the world from West Asia and the Caucasus.
I wanted to ask you a little bit about the rioters and their size and the kind of legitimacy given. My own impression is that Iran is different from Venezuela in this regard, based on electoral records. My impression is that in Venezuela, the opposition is much bigger, slightly more than 50% on the Chavista Madurismo side, slightly less than 50% based on those who voted. Um, it seems to me that the opposition, which the U.S. and the West is trying to manipulate within Iran, is smaller. You mentioned MEK, um, TechVV groups, ISIS, and so on. Can you explain a little bit more about their ideologies, their nature, and the size and the public sentiment of Iran vis-a-vis these groups? Because we've been hearing from the Trump administration that we are there to save the Iranian people. The irony is that even the protests that you referred to at the beginning have been caused by crushing U.S. sanctions to begin with. And so you impose US sanctions, crush the economy, and then you use that to justify regime change operation. So, if you could tell a little bit more about the opposition in Iran.
Sure. One thing that I would like to just add is that before I answer the question is that in Venezuela, because I've been there a few times and I'm in constant contact with my friends there. Uh, Many of the opponents of the government, they're now supporting the government because they're so outraged by U.S. behavior. So they're far more than just half or a little bit over a half right now. The country is united against the United States. In the case of Iran, it's quite clear why these groups don't have support. First of all, in Iran, we have many political parties, and there's a broad political, um, um, let's say, um, competitive environment. Right now, Mr. Pezeshkian is affiliated to one camp. Uh, Before him, President Raisi was affiliated to another camp. Both are somewhat centrist, but they're from different camps. So in Iran, you do have a very broad, let's say, political environment that is that allows people to make very differing choices that have serious implications in the way in which the country is run. And then we have to look at these people that the West is supporting. The MEK cult, they in the 1980s they started armed insurrection in the early 1980s. Then they went to Iraq and they fought for Saddam Hussein against their own country. Is that going to make them popular among the Iranian people? Supporting Saddam Hussein, of all people, against their country, someone who invaded the country? So they have no credibility. The monarchists, the son of the Shah, who is a playboy, who is not very smart, he has serious family problems, which I don't want to talk about. His father was subservient to the United States, so was his grandfather, both very brutal. He hasn't been to Iran for almost half a century, and he went to he went to Palestine, and he went to he basically uh, kissed the ring in Tel Aviv. Is that going to make is that would he have any credibility in Iran? Then ISIS remnants and these Kurdish terrorists that are based in northern Iraq and funded and are working closely with the United States and the Israeli regime. These are the forces that have been used for the riots. Any of them, does anyone really believe that any of these groups will have any credibility or legitimacy in the eyes of Iranians? Of course not. But that is the problem with empire. The empire can never control someone who's independent, someone who really cares about his or her own country, and therefore they can never be tools of a foreign power. The only people who are willing to be tools of a foreign power are people who would have no credibility among the people. Just like the Nobel Peace Prize winner this year. She has no credibility among the people of Venezuela simply because she is advocating and was advocating airstrikes against their own country. So people who are calling, and the Shah's son is also calling for the United States to bomb Iran. Does anyone in their right mind think that Iranians would support that? You will find, of course, extremists everywhere and foolish people everywhere, but the overwhelming majority of Iranians will never join the MEK cult or the monarchists or ISIS or these Kurdish terrorists affiliated to the United States and Israel. It's clear as day. And that's one reason why so many people came to the streets last Monday, because they wanted to make a political statement that we're not going to allow this to happen.
We are almost out of time. One very quick question. There are some media outlets that say that the U.S. Gulf allies have been trying to persuade the U.S. Not to attack Iran. Um, you have mentioned about uh, some of these countries being used as financial basis to destabilize the Iranian currency. What kind of role do you expect the U.S. Gulf allies to play in this um, in at this moment?
These are all family dictatorships, and some of them are quite tiny, and they're very much dependent on oil and gas. And these family dictatorships, some of them host many millions of foreigners. In the case of the Emirates, there are 1 million Emirati, I think, roughly passport holders, and many million foreigners. The same is true in Bahrain. Sorry, in Qatar, and so on. If there's no more oil or gas, these regimes won't last. They'll be gone in days. In fact, they may end up to be non-Arab countries, because the majority of the people there are not even from the Arabian Peninsula. So it's obvious that all of them are very worried. They don't want war because they know that Iran is dead serious. This would be a fight for survival, and Iran is not going to pull any punches. And on the other hand, they're also very worried because despite their foolishness in previous decades in supporting ISIS and Al Qaeda in Syria, and the genocidal war in Yemen that initially Turkey and Qatar also supported in 2015, and then when the differences between the Emirates and Saudi Arabia and Qatar emerged, Qatar and Turkey split away from them. But in the past, these countries were targeting Iran, of course, on behalf of the United States and in coordination with the United States. But now they're worried about Israel, the Israeli regime. Everyone knows that if Iran is weakened, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, the region is going to be in serious trouble. So they're all worried about the Israeli regime, and they're all worried about their own fate. And as I said, Iran is not going to pull any punches. So if we have war and global economic collapse, people across the West will recognize that their leaders brought this upon them. And it will not end well for anyone, but it will not end well in particular for those who initiated conflict. And I think Trump would be the first person who people will be seeking out, wondering why he destroyed the global economy.
We'll leave it there, Professor Marandi. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much for having me. It's always a pleasure.
Hi, my name is Ayushman. I, along with Jyotisman, have started this platform. In the last 2 years, we have tried to build content for the left and progressive forces. We have interviewed economists, historians, political commentators, and activists so far. If you have liked our content so far and want us to build an archive for the left, I have two requests for you. Please do consider donating for the cause. Link is in the description below. Also, if you are not able to do so, don't feel sad. You can always like our videos and share our videos to your comrades. Finally, don't forget to hit the subscribe button.